Thank you. I think I'm the speaker you're looking for, the last one. Is that you know, I hope, I've been an activist for 47 years in the cause of freedom, and I hope that in my next 30 years that I'm as big a thorn in the side of the leftists and as effective as Phyllis Schlafly has been, and we can keep this going. I'm also deplorable, and the Southern Poverty Law Center says I'm a domestic terrorist, so I have it all. There's one major issue that is affecting every aspect of your life, but it's never even mentioned in the news or in any campaign. Your local government is changing. It's changing from the way that most of you perceive it. It's changing in its makeup. It's changing in the way that it operates. The question you have to ask is, does that change mean more representation or less? Does it mean that you're closer to your elected officials or more distant? Does it mean a change for the better or for the worse as it relates to your personal life and your plans, for your property, for your community, and for your nation? A new federal policy is going to quickly answer all of those questions for you. To begin with, let me introduce to you a new term that is quickly becoming the center focus of local government: fair housing. Specifically, a new federal program called Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. You know, the guys in the government, if nothing else, they're really clever when they come up with these terms, these names of these programs. Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. Well, I'll just call it AFFH. The Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule is federal enforcement of sustainable development, smart growth cities, and Agenda 21. For 24 years, we have warned about Agenda 21. We have been called conspiracy theorists. We've been called kooks. We've been told it's all local. It's just local plans. It's nothing international. It's just local. Until now, there has been at least a pretense that smart growth development was a local process. That, of course, is what the American Planning Association and non-governmental organizations and your city councils have assured you. But through the revelation of AFFH, it's clear that such development is an unprecedented top-down dictatorship controlled by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. It was announced in July of 2015 by HUD Secretary Julian Castro. And the excuse for this 377-page ruling is to promote and assure non-discrimination and achieve balanced and integrated living patterns for all citizens. Communities receiving HUD grants must complete an assessment of fair housing document that requires the communities, the recipients of the grants, to analyze occupancy data that includes race, color, religion, national origin, English proficiency, and more, along with a list of factors that might contribute to an imbalance of living patterns between low, middle, and upper middle income families. Communities that must resolve those so-called imbalances to HUD's satisfaction. There's a task. The danger lies in the taking of the federal grants. We warned you, strings attached. If a community has taken the federal grants to fund local development, create low-income housing programs, and more, then that community has essentially sacrificed its independence to HUD. Local rule no longer applies. And of course, nearly every community has already taken such grants in the name of smart growth, sustainable development, the creation of comprehensive development plans. All of those NGO groups standing there in the background, all of those planning groups, the American Planning Association, the Sierra Club, the Nature Conservancy, all those guys in the back rooms of your local government saying, take the grant. They ought to shoot it in their arms. Take the grant. Now, HUD is coming back to collect its due, and communities are about to find out that there is no such thing as free money. No matter what the city fathers desire for local policy, even if you have risen up and gotten the opportunity to elect good people to your county commission, to your city councils, it doesn't matter. Through each step, HUD maintains control. HUD now will dictate the use of this money under AFFH rules. And if you think that sounds exhausting, it's just the beginning. In fact, HUD is actually forcing local communities into regions and regional planning against their will and often without their knowledge. They're sitting there with those maps and decided, let's shove them over here. I told an audience in Ohio last week that was in a rural community. Here I am talking about community development, and they're scratching their heads like, what are you talking about? You know, we've got the barns over here, and we got the cows out that way. What's your problem? And I said, how would you like to be part of Cleveland? Oh, that's what we're talking about here. They slip you into that region. And if you think that HUD AFFH programs will not apply to your community, you are wrong. Given the scope of the analysis and the dual local and regional requirements, virtually every grant recipient community will be required to produce a discrimination mitigation plan that can include additional affordable housing, additional transportation choices, or new high-density structures that are all paid for by the community. Through AFFH, HUD controls that mitigation process and will dictate where and how communities build homes and even who will live there. To reduce disparities, I love this, communities can be required to construct high-density urban villages that guarantee access to community assets for all residents. What does that even mean? We're blocking somebody from going to the park? We're keeping somebody out of a school? I don't know where this is happening. Some may require communities, let us say your community is perfect. You don't need any of this. You've got all kinds of equality and equity and everything else that fits in there. But you got to qualify for the grant. HUD will require you to advertise in nearby regions to attract sufficient families to eliminate HUD-defined imbalances. As a side note, several years ago, a friend of mine from Alaska told me that EPA rules said they had to clean so much pollution out of the water in order to qualify. They didn't have any pollution. You know what they had to do? They had to pollute the water with dead fish and clean them out and say, we qualify now. This is what these regulations are going to tell you. If you've got a great community, you've got to throw the dead fish in there first and clean them out in order to qualify. And while HUD pretends that it's all voluntary, in fact, if communities balk at annexation to these regions, HUD threatens them with lawsuits if they don't comply to HUD's satisfaction. HUD grant recipients must certify, now get this is technical, they must certify that they will take meaningful actions to further the goals identified in their fair housing analysis and will take no action that is materially inconsistent with its obligation to affirmatively further fair housing. Now, this important bit of legalese contained in the Federal Register links fair housing to the Federal False Claims Act. It enables the government or a third party to bring legal action in the event that local governments, quote, knowingly present or cause to be presented to the U.S. government a false claim for payment for approval. You take the grant under a certain claim, and if you didn't do everything under that, they can file lawsuits against you. And that bit of legal jibber-jabber is the most dangerous threat to you personally. And here's why. HUD isn't bound by any specific rules. It makes them up as it goes. Trying to know if you are in compliance or just what compliance really is becomes nearly impossible. So if your community put together its application and it said something in there that somebody at HUD decides, nope, that's not what they said, you're out of compliance. A contributing factor for non-compliance, get this, might be as simple as opposition in the community to proposed or existing developments. In other words, if you decide today to go back to your community after listening to me, and you decide to begin to protest all of this in your community, that might just be enough to put your community out of compliance and face possible lawsuits from HUD. Keep that in mind if when you go home you start to meet stiff resistance from your elected representatives. It may just be out of pure fear on their part. Shut up, don't say anything. The fact is, AFFH will destroy private property rights and property values as it socially engineers whole neighborhoods. More importantly, the greatest danger of the AFFH rule is this: the fact that a direct threat to locally elected home rule in communities across the nation. As I said in the beginning, they're taking over. The pretense of local control is gone. What we are dealing with here is a political agenda, and it's certainly not intended to be fair. The federal government has decided that people who have worked, saved, and planned so that they can buy homes in nice, safe neighborhoods of their own choosing are racists. HUD charges that owning nicer property than others, well, that's a social injustice. The government now claims that it's unfair unless everyone can have the same whether they earn it or not. And it doesn't matter whether they can afford such a home. We're told that it's racist to deny someone an equal home just because they don't have the money for it. White privilege, don't you know? Well, you may be watching the riots that are taking place around the country, the Black Lives Matter protests taking place in every city street around the country. You may be alarmed that such violence can happen in your downtown, and you may wonder what's behind such activity. Well, get ready for the same kind of threats and violence to possibly come to your own neighborhood, simply because you have a nice house. Social justice is the name of the game under AFFH, and that means the rule of law is dismissed in favor of fairness. Social justice is enforced on us using pure emotion. It's basically operating at the level of a 12-year-old girl in a pet shop who sees the little puppies looking out of their cages with their sad eyes, and she says, "Let the little doggies out." Social justice is purely based on redistribution of wealth, your wealth. That's money you worked for, saved, invested, and protected for your needs, your dreams, your future. Selfish, cries the social justice mongers. Why should you have so much when others have so little? Never mind that you had to save your money while forced to pay 50% of it in taxes that theoretically was supposed to go to the less fortunate. The fact is, there is no justice in such a policy. Envy, desire, jealousy, and theft are much closer to the truth. Now, do you think that sounds harsh? Well, tell me how harsh this sounds. To produce the community's plan for compliance, HUD rules demand that a wide array of interested parties participate in its creation, just to assure the community input is all there and to keep things fair, of course. Well, that includes civil rights groups, affordable housing developers, and civic activist organizations. They call this civil society. All have a specific, as usual, left-of-center agenda and a definite interest in the outcome. Now, ask yourselves just why HUD would be so insistent in demanding that the community tie itself to the so-called civil rights groups in order to get this grant. The answer to that question is diabolical. Thanks to AFFH, recipient communities will have lawsuit targets on their back. The rules wording has created a hunting ground for predatory third parties to get rich suing local governments. You see, if the community hesitates to comply in any way, perhaps local voters deciding to turn down the program, or maybe there aren't enough local funds to fully comply, then HUD has a secret weapon waiting for them. Lack of compliance in HUD's eyes results in lawsuits over civil rights violations. The civil rights groups then become a useful tool. They start protests and demand fairness. They get on television. They pressure City Hall. And to the rescue comes HUD with its own lawsuits. Picture Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson in your neighborhood. The NAACPs, the ACLUs, the ADLs, and some, along some of these groups could even be the League of Women Voters and the Move-Ons. It will file papers in local courts charging local communities with bias and segregation because of their racial and age makeup. Baltimore, Maryland became one of the first cities to feel such pressure and the threats as the NAACP sued Baltimore over alleged housing segregation. Get this. The NAACP argued that Section 8 subsidized federal housing programs, quote, bunched people together and that it only fuels more crime and other problems. That's not fair. Well, duh. We said that from the beginning. Section 8 creates ghettos, hopeless, horrible places to live in. We told them that. Now the NAACP files suit going, not fair. The solution, says the NAACP, is to integrate the poor among wealthier families. Outrageous as it sounds, such social justice mongers actually accuse those living in affluent neighborhoods of, quote, self-segregation for white privilege. And the pressure from these groups, along with the massive force of HUD backing, have resulted in Baltimore being forced to agree to spend $30 million of taxpayer dollars over the next 10 years to build 1,000 low-income houses in affluent neighborhoods. The result will be the destruction of property values and the loss of equity for the homeowners, in short, destruction of earned wealth, leading to the destruction of the middle class. That's what socialism does. It creates more poor. Social justice. On top of that, Baltimore has moved to destroy the property rights of landlords by denying them the ability to not rent to people who can't afford their properties. And who will pay the landlords if he's stuck with a bill? The only result will be fewer landlords and fewer housing choices. And in Portland, Oregon, the infamous poster child of federal smart growth programs, well, now the city council has unanimously approved a new tax to raise $12 million per year to pay for affordable housing. Their county commissioner, Dan Saltzman, said, quote, "The lack of affordable housing is the greatest crisis facing our city right now." You know, maybe he should take a look at the 20-year smart growth history of Portland, in which massive amounts of land were locked away to limit the sprawl of the city. This led to land shortages, which led to bans on single-family homes, which led to the need for massive high-rise apartment buildings, all of which led to higher costs and shortages of homes. Now they have a crisis of low-income housing. Their solution is another tax on construction, driving up housing costs even more. And HUD is rushing to enforce AFFH with a vengeance. Since there is no official definition of affirmatively furthering fair housing, the definition is whatever HUD declares it to be. There is no way for the local government to win such a suit. The result of a suit against Westchester County, New York, was $62.5 million, a sum greater than all of the money that the community had ever taken from HUD. And a huge part of that settlement went right into the pocket of the NGO group that filed the suit. You see, that's how it works. That's what it's designed to do. And those who believe that AFFH helps the poor and minorities are thinking only with their emotions and ignoring the gritty reality of life under centralized rule. By herding African Americans and other minorities and low-income families like cattle, the government is resigning them to a future worse than poverty. They have lost their rights, their choices, and their ability to excel through self-determination and personal growth. I get letters from people living in low-income housing, African Americans and others, saying, "Help, they're destroying my neighborhood." Can you imagine what it's like to be forced out of your home? People tend to gather in neighborhoods with their families, with people with like traditions and ideas, forced out of that, put in snob somewhere where they don't want to be and where they're not wanted. Boy, that gives you all kinds of security in your home, doesn't it? Under AFFH, local officials' hands are tied, forcing them to accommodate these draconian federal requirements. This diminishes their ability to represent you. More suits are being filed. The threat of such lawsuits are paralyzing local officials. And meanwhile, some members of Congress have actually tried to eliminate AFFH. Representative Paul Gosar of Arizona managed to pass legislation in the House to defund AFFH. And then Senator Mike Lee of Utah introduced a similar bill in the Senate. Their plan was to put those two bills together and be language in the HUD appropriations bill, which put into the omnibus spending bill they knew Obama would have to sign. What happened at the last minute was they were betrayed by Speaker Paul Ryan and Senator Mitch McConnell, as they removed the language from the omnibus spending bill, and then they in fact gave HUD even more money. Senator Lee is trying to get the bill passed. It's S-1909. We need to give him support to get this bill through. Let me make one thing clear. The civil rights legislation of the 1960s made it illegal to bar people from neighborhoods based on their color or ethnic background. It guaranteed them the opportunity, but it said nothing about forcing people into neighborhoods to live beyond their means. No one, no matter their color or ethnic background, has a right to force their way into a neighborhood that they can't afford. Instead, they must do the same thing that those who already live there did: work, save, invest, and prepare. Then no one can stop them. It has nothing to do with race or some perceived special privilege. HUD is using AFFH as a weapon to destroy local rule and fully enforce Agenda 21 and its promise to reorganize human society. They are plotting the demise of your freedom and they are nationalizing your home. They are destroying the investments of every property owner. We can still stop them. I believe that Barack Obama did us a huge favor in bringing this in here, because for all these years we've been ignored. Suddenly, elected officials see the damage of it, and they are starting to come to us and say, what do we do? And I say, listen to us. Finally, listen. Your voice has got to be heard. You have to pressure your local government to stop applying for the grants. And you have to be ready to stand with local officials who really are trying to rise up and do something. Agenda 21 and AFFH are built on a house of cards, a house of lies. And the fact is, if we can expose this, that house of lies can be easily blown down. Ladies and gentlemen, be the wind. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Bravo, yeah. Thank you. Go there, Jordan. We got time for just a couple of questions. Thank you, Tom, for that energetic report. And fired up here. Here we go, over here.
Okay, do you believe that Trump will get rid of that?
He has said he would. I have people I've worked with who have met with him, and he's promised that. I was just told yesterday that I might have an opportunity to meet with him sometime in October, and we'll do it again. So we're going to hold his feet to the fire.
Thank you so much, Paul. We sure appreciate you, or Tom. Tom has come and helped us in battles in California and has been at this for a long, long time. Do you think the ultimate goal of all of this, just like Agenda 21, is to make the globalist agenda come true, where no nation is superior to any other, that the United States will have lost our wonderful freedoms, our great economy that we had, and our free enterprise system?
Do I think that's what yes, absolutely. It is to dumb us down so we don't know how to question authority, and authority is authority. And that's what they do. Before I finish, let me give a selfless promotion here. This is my brand new book. It's called Erase. It is the first time in my life I ever wrote fiction. It is a murder mystery set in a sustainable world. I have 4 heroes in it that come at it from 4 directions. One from religion, one from education, one from business, and one from politics. And this book has been compared by Richard Viguerie, by the Heartland Institute, and others to Atlas Shrugged, 1984, and Michael Crichton's State of Fear. I got them here, and I would sure love to not take them home with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Great job. Thank you. Thank you, Tom.